All right. Welcome to Polly with us. Now, this wasn't even the schedule, but me and the homie Heem, we was having an interesting off-air conversation.
Hmm.
We were just talking about a year ago and how things were with COVID, and y'all picking up in the middle of this conversation.
Yeah,
So, I guess we'll just give a little background. We were just because my man, he's about to go out of town. He got a
yeah.
fresh cut or whatever. You know, he haven't really been getting cut since COVID popped off. We were just recapping,
Hmm.
and we was like, "Yo, it's crazy how something like a grocery store worker, where people really consider it a meaningless job, um, minimum wage type of job.
Hmm.
People look down on it, but when
Hmm.
COVID hit, you realize, damn, that supply chain is real." And you
Hmm.
need people out there to stock the shelves, do
Hmm.
deliveries, um, and nobody knew what was going on. It was really a dangerous job,
Hmm.
and you have people in the poorer end of society that was really out there putting in the work, and they really didn't get the rewards that they deserved.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah, man. Like, you talk about the supply chain, so like that goes back to even like the people that are packaging our foods, in the warehouses and stuff. They're packaging the food to be shipped out on the trucks and going to the stores and stuff. Uh, a lot of companies, as we were discussing before, we went live here. A lot of companies they did that heroes pay stuff. Like I think Kroger did that. Or they did like just like we appreciate you pay and stuff like that. But they didn't call it hazard pay because hazard pay suggests more compensation for the work that they sign up for. That's in their contracts, I believe. When they sign the contracts, they that's included in there and so forth. And so a lot of companies were very smart in not calling it that, and because of that, a lot of workers that we're talking about now that were in the warehouses, the food packaging places, the our truck drivers, people that are stocking shelves at the stores, people that are at the stores, working grocery stores and so forth, they weren't getting hazard pay, and they were getting that extra couple of dollars per hour up until like pretty much until like the end of the summer last year. Like a lot of those supermarkets and grocery stores, they stopped giving like the extra pay bonus for working during a pandemic, and there's been no support for them at all. Like no politician talks about it because the way our political system is set up, the only thing that matters is the ever smaller middle class, and even that's not mattering that much anymore. But like we always talk about it here, like there's a lot of people that are like working poor or working very very low or middle class that are doing these jobs that are vital. Like if we didn't have grocery stores last year, you know there would have been riots in the streets if we didn't have food last year. Let's just keep it real. Like people would have like lost their mind and rioted because there's no food. Now actually
right,
it may have been a real insurrection, not the bullshit, not the crap they did on January 6th, like a real like raw sticking arms together to get some food because this is nuts. And those people did a lot to keep us up and running, and there was no support for them. We were talking before about I got a haircut today. My first time going to the barber in about a year. And we were chatting, barber. We were just talking about stuff and just how it was for them. And they just he said in this shop he said it was totally cool and no one got sick and so forth. But a lot of those, like you were talking about your barber, he didn't get the PPP loans,
right,
and a lot of like small businesses that really needed the PPP loans that were actually up and running, that they were like interfacing with customers and so forth even during the pandemic, didn't get these loans, or they couldn't because of COVID restrictions. Couldn't get these loans while Ruth Chris and the Lakers and other big entities got these PPP loans. So it was just a really really confusing time last year. We're over a year into this now, and it's still like those people haven't been appreciated at all. And uh, you know, I don't. That's like not even in discussion at all anywhere in our media, and no politicians talking about it. It's just completely forgotten. But those were like the real labor heroes, quote unquote, and they were doing it on some like they were using that language in a real like BS way to a not pay them the money that they were owed, but b also make it so that they're sacrificing themselves and that their lives are are expendable, like soldier in a war, which is really messed up because that's not what they signed up for at all. None of them people signed up to say like, yeah, I'm going to catch COVID and die, but at least I'm stocking the shelf for for great food at Whole Foods, whatever. They weren't doing that at all. That wasn't the point. They were trying to feed their families, and there's been no talk about how to really accurately compensate them. They didn't get more of a stimulus or anything. It's just completely out of sight, out of mind.
Right. And you're exactly right. And a lot of those workers consider themselves lucky to even have a job because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people got laid off.
Mm-hmm.
And it get me thinking because we hear the critiques of capitalism all the time. And I think sometimes it's a little bit too simplistic. Either you're a capitalist or you're a socialist. I don't consider myself either.
Same here.
Like in some aspects, I agree with competition and being able to start a business, being
Mm-hmm.
able to compete. But I do believe in regulation, and I think some industries should be completely socialized.
Yeah.
And maybe you can have like a subsidy or something for some small private businesses, but for the most part, like something like healthcare, I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe it should be a competition for healthcare,
I agree.
or I don't believe we should be making money off of people misery. Now, if you come up with a product that, let's just say you have feet problems or something like that, that can make it easier for people to walk during the day, like the inserts and sure in the shoes. Should that be socialized? No, I don't think so. I
Mm-hmm.
think because that's not a life and death situation. Yes, it make your life a little bit more comfortable. Yes, in that aspect, I believe in capitalism, but something like paying $100,000 for heart surgery or something crazy.
That's
No,
insane. Yeah.
yeah, no, no, no. That should be free at the point of access. And insurance companies, if you have a pre-existing condition now, even though with the ACA they can't automatically reject you anymore, what they can do, they can make your rates higher.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cap anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes back to the critique that I think me and you had last week with the Biden administration. That was one of his. That was part of his platform. You would pay no more than 8.9% of your salary in healthcare, which is
Mm-hmm.
still a significant point of your salary a year. I mean, that's not cheap in itself, but it's better than what we have now. We couldn't even get there.
Yeah.
So uh, I don't know. It just it's so much stuff in society that we need to adjust. I want to get your opinion on this. Have you been seeing the signs or the reports like McDonald's? They trying to get people to apply by giving them free meals. That's
Or
not new.
iPhone, or the iPhones actually. One of them was like iPhones, and they didn't say what model, of course, but the iPhones was like one of them too.
Yeah, iPhones. That's something different. But yeah, same realm. But McDonald's is offering free. They was doing that anyway. I knew people that worked at McDonald's,
Yeah.
and they'll get free meals during lunch. I'm like, that's not really new. They've been doing that,
Yeah, man. It's yeah, or like the yeah, yeah.
but they using it as a marketing campaign. Why don't you just pay people a living wage?
It's
Why don't
it's
you just do that?
it's
Simple.
one of the funniest things. Yeah, they just don't want to do the right thing. Like I was joking about the iPhone. That was some places they're offering iPhones for people to if they get a job as well. And it's like, first of all, we don't know what iPhone model it is. It could be like an iPhone 5 or 6. So that's number
Right.
one. But secondly, like, you know, why are you pacifying me with something that's not going to sustain my life? Like if you pay people $15, of course, it's probably still too low nowadays, but let's just start with that number. $15. That's going to help somebody's life tangibly more than exponentially more than an iPhone will. It just will, and
And
they won't do that.
if you switch cell phone companies, you could get a free iPhone anyway.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, like you really want a free iPhone? Stop T-Mobile, go to Verizon. Stop Verizon, go to T-Mobile, or whatever you want to do. You
Right.
can basically they all have these deals where you can get a free iPhone anyway.
Right.
That's
Right.
like it's crazy, but the calculations for them because the accountants must feel that it's cheaper to do that than to raise the salaries.
Oh
It's
yeah.
cheaper for them to lobby Congress for them to actually pay people what they are worth.
I mean,
So
consider how many I don't know the number off my head right now, but how many employees of McDonald's are there in America?
yeah,
You
I don't
know,
know off the top of my head, right?
it's got to be over 100,000 at the very least. That's probably like on the low end. So if you increase 100,000, and this is people that work in the restaurants, not in the corporate side, but in the restaurants.
Right.
If you like increase the wages to $15 for everybody that works in the restaurant, yeah, that's gonna be a huge bite into their revenue, and they can't have that. It's much cheaper to pay somebody six figures to lobby on the hill or to do X, Y, and Z or give people iPhones and all that stuff than it is to like pay people that much money to more money, all the workers that work in restaurants that much more money to work there and stuff. And yeah, man, like it's funny you bring up the capitalism stuff too. Like I'm with you on that. I think there's no like I'm very like very if you listen to the show and listen to me talk, like y'all would probably say he's a very very left-minded person. I'm like, yeah, I am. However, I do believe competition has like really helped society, and I don't want that to go away either. But I also feel like yeah, it could be fair. You mentioned healthcare should definitely like be government ran.
Mhm.
We were talking before about transportation. A lot of areas around the country, a lot of urban areas are considering the models of like having free transportation, especially considering last year where people weren't riding it except for those essential workers that were going to work at their jobs at fast food restaurants or they're working at grocery stores and so forth. They were the only ones that were riding it, so they were paying for transportation last year, even though like they were like the backbone of it. And so a lot of areas are considering making transport free across the country. And yeah, that made me think like, yeah, definitely like commuter transportation should be free. I would even, I mean, or the government ran. I'd even go further and say that the airlines should be government ran. Like I actually think that like that's probably an issue as well because like the air situation is kind of like out of control. I think cars probably is like one thing that can be privatized and you can buy your own car, do your own thing. But other stuff like like trains and buses and like I said, airlines. I kind of feel like that should be. I don't see why that isn't that because that gets people around and it's like a very important. It's like a very important mode of like transportation and also uh, that would probably open up so many work opportunities for people if they're able to like move around freely on public transportation. Um, if you're able to like take a train to go to work every day from like I live in DC. If there's a job in Baltimore that I don't have to drive for and worry about the cost of like either getting the train to go up there or purchasing a car to go up there, that's so much money out of my pocket that I have to worry about. Like the pain, the cost is more so time commitments and all that stuff going back and forth. But the actual here's $15 or here's a gas money or whatever, that's out of my mind. I can now focus on like getting to work and not having to worry about how I'm paying to go back and forth every week. And it's also bringing me to a new market to work where there's more opportunities there and stuff. So yeah, man, like I'm with you. Like I think that you use competition to make life easier, but some of these industries, they definitely should be like government ran and have more like control over it. And I just think transportation is another one that we should probably consider would be something that you could consider as well.
I definitely think that should be considered. I think earlier I said subsidy. I said that because my cat was by my foot, so I was trying to shoo him off and talk at the same time. I meant supplemental. I meant supplemental when it comes to private because even with Medicare for all, private insurance was allowed with certain aspects of it. I don't have a problem with that.
hmm
But it should be a baseline. And when we say certain industries, the government should basically have a free option, that doesn't mean it's going to be the most lavish thing. It should just be a baseline.
Yeah.
Even for healthcare, it should be baseline care.
Mm.
If you want more extensive coverage, yeah, you could go the private route. But it should be something where the majority of the needs is covered, and including mental health, because that's something that's not talked about enough. And this ties into one of the topics that I want to discuss today.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you watch tennis or not, but it's been all over the news with
Yeah. Yeah.
Naomi Osaka.
Yep. Yep.
Like, I heard of her. I'm not going front. I'm not a huge tennis fan. I watch, when Serena's playing, I watch every once in a while.
Right.
I might watch a match, but I'm not an avid tennis fan. But I have heard of her because
Mm-hmm.
she's the number 2 ranked female tennis player in the world.
Uh, she's like, I think, top 5 now. She's not having the best year. And it could be other reasons why with what's running now, but she's not having the best year this year. But yeah, she's a top 5 player. Probably at her best, she's probably the best player in the world. But right now, she's like, I think, 4 or 5.
Okay, so you really into tennis then?
Yeah, man. When the Aggies came out in the early '90s, like I love those
Andreas,
shoes, and
Pete
Agassi,
Sanford.
Pete Sampras, yeah.
Uh,
I was big on those people. Boris Becker on the women's game. Like, women's game wasn't like, it was Steffi Graf and Monica Seles. And then what happened to Monica Seles and all that stuff, which is unfortunate. But Serena's like what really got me into the women's game heavy. And Venus, and like, yeah, it's. Tennis is a very, very fun sport. If you played it, I played it when I was younger a little bit. I'm not the best
yeah,
at it, but
it's not as easy as it look.
no, it's not easy at
It
all. It's
looks
one of
kind
the
of easy, but when I played it, I was like, "Oh, this is really
it's a it's a challenging ass
difficult."
sport, bro. It's a
Yeah.
challenging sport, but the biggest thing about tennis, unlike team sports where you can fall on your colleagues and your teammates and ride with them, it's only you versus your opponent, and
Mhm.
that's where the mental health stuff is very critical, and that's why when Naomi Osaka's saying like, "Hey, like I've been going through it the last couple of years." I mean, you got to remember when she won her first major in I think 2017 or 18, when she beat Serena Williams, she got booed, and it wasn't her fault really, but she got booed because the Serena was having the issue with the judge, and they were going back and forth, and she's playing Naomi Osaka, and Osaka's just there doing her thing. She's not like really, she's trying to play her game, and this is all happening around her. She wins the match, and then the crowd boos her. And then they weren't necessarily angry at her; they were angry at the
Mhm.
judge. But still, if you're like, I think she was 18 at the time, or 19,
Mhm.
to get booed like that, you know, that's and she cited that as the moment like when she started having issues. And we don't think about these things with athletes; we think of them as just like cartoon characters that feel no pain. But a lot of them coming out now saying like, yeah, I've been having issues. Like, I think DeMar DeRozan was one. Kevin Love said he had like a anxiety attack or panic
Mhm.
attack during the game.
Yep.
A lot of them are coming out now saying like, yeah, man, like I have issues with this stuff, and there needs to be more support. So yeah, it's definitely something that if you're seeing these big, strong, best athletes in the world types having these issues, then yeah, this needs to be a vital thing that's a part of the healthcare system in our country, and that would be something that would fall in line with some type of government ran healthcare program.
Right.
Excuse me.
Right. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about with that, like, you have more in-depth knowledge of the game of tennis than I do,
Mm-hmm.
but I think what she's going through, a lot of regular people can relate to on a smaller level. We're not getting paid the money that she's getting paid, but I know somebody that's making 6 figures that's miserable at their job,
Mm-hmm.
and they looking for a escape route right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And 6 figures, for a regular person society, is pretty decent money.
Mm-hmm.
And people look at them like they crazy. But this is commonplace, and I know more than one person like this.
Yeah.
So, and a study just came out about what stress does, being stressed at work, how it
Mm-hmm.
affects your health. I mean, it's not the first study. There's multiple studies that came out that stress take years off of your life.
We're the same study. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So a lot of people just saying, you know what, F it. Like this, I like the money I'm making, but it's not worth my sanity. And I have a personal story like this too. People was looking at me like I was crazy. A few years ago, I was working a particular job, and I was in line to make pretty good money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to give too much details, but I hated the job, and I was just like, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm going to
Wow.
I'm going to take a step all the way back. I went back to school, got my master's, and restarted my career
Mm-hmm.
because of that. I'm in a pretty decent position now, but you know, when I decide to restart, anytime you restart, you know, it put strain on finances, and but for me, I was willing to deal with that stress more than to keep going in that one direction. Because the way I looked at it, I'm like, okay, I can make good money, and I'll be able to do a lot of things I want to do with the money, but is the stress on the day to day worth it? Worth it?
Or
Because you think about it, a lot of times you at work, especially if you a job with mandatory overtime, which a lot of jobs have, or if you're a salary employee and you have certain deadlines you have to meet, you're working overtime, not getting paid overtime.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like sometimes you really spending most of your waking hours at work. You spend a lot of times you spend more of your woke hours at work than you do at home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just like, okay, is this going to be my life for the rest of my life? I'm going to do this,
Mm-hmm.
um, and cause hypertension, stress. It's a decision we all have to deal with. I
Mm-hmm.
know with Naomi Osaka situation, some people saying, well, she might not really have mental health problems. She might just use the excuse. I'm like, I don't know. I don't particularly care if she's telling the truth or not in this particular circumstance because it leads to a different conversation. And even let's just say worst case scenario that is not that's not the truth or whatever. She just was mad at the officials and the people at the first open. She don't want to do it. It's still true that not only a lot of athletes go through this, but a lot of regular people go through it.
Right.
And it's a conversation that need to be had either way. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even going to speculate on that aspect of it. And I'm going to take her at her word. Because when people is depressed, because I worked in the healthcare industry, people can be depressed and not showing you signs. People put up a good front, especially if they at work and they know they have to have a certain performance. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting.
Yeah. It's yeah. I think yeah, man. Like a lot of people are going through it. And there has to be this. We have to kind of like. I think in American society, there's this, especially like now. Like before the pandemic, there was that whole rise and grind culture, where you have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and complete like 10 tasks before the sun comes up, or else you didn't have a successful day. Or like I think like I remember reading about like The Rock or Mark Wahlberg's like workout regimen and how insane it is, where they have to get
Mhm.
up. They're like Mark Wahlberg, I think, was like up at 3 o'clock in the morning, working out like 3 hours a day or whatever, eating like just something insane, like something that doesn't even make sense and it's not normal. Or the whole like rise and grind culture where you have to like complete X amount of tasks before the sun comes up and before you come to work that day, to start having a successful day. And that may work for some people. I don't know how many people that works for. Honestly, like I'm not even sure if that works for them necessarily. I think some people are putting on that front, like you also suggested. But even if it works for them, that's not for everybody. We have to like start really like taking stock in our mental health and really valuing that. And a lot of us, we're not taught to do that in this country. We're always taught that it's building forward, moving forward, progress, growth, and never like you know, sitting down and like just making sure that you're right mentally. It is, and it's weird too. There's also like a lot of lip service to that. I had a job a couple years ago, where like it was always hammered home mental health, value mental health, and all that stuff. Meanwhile, people that are working under the head of this department working like 12-hour days, like you know what I mean, like you were saying earlier, working 12-hour days. Um, the pay wasn't really like that good to be doing that, but they were so focused in on their job and dedicated to their job because it was like a really important job that they just did it even though they knew it wasn't helpful for them and people were burning out. And it's just lip service, like work these, think about your mental health and take moments to pause and breathe and all that stuff. But also you're expected to do this for these people and work on call for everybody and stuff. And it just it doesn't make sense. And that's the hypocrisy of like work in our country. And so with what's going on with Naomi Osaka, she comes from, tennis is like a real, like, especially if you're a high level player like her, everybody's taking care of you and you have like stuff that's helping you out and all that stuff. But shit, like I said earlier, this is her first moment on the national stage. She got booed after winning her first major. Like I never will forget that. Like I remember watching that match and thinking like, damn, this is kind of crazy. Like I'm kind of disappointed in the US. I'm very disappointed in the US Open crowd for booing her like this, even though I knew it wasn't necessarily her. You still got to like take in the moment of what's going on here and how that impacts her. And it doesn't surprise me that like she's going through stuff. Even when I've seen her do interviews, she is very like soft spoken. She's not one of these like rah rah get in your face types. Like Serena Williams, for instance, she's like very like, I'm in your face and I'm Serena Williams, like I'm this. And you look at her, it was never like that with Naomi Osaka. And yeah, man, like I don't know if people are saying that it's potentially like she's struggling on clay this year and she doesn't want to answer questions about that. But I don't know, man. I maybe she shouldn't have to.
Right.
Maybe she should value her mental health more than having to worry about like questions that aren't really like impactful or meaningful. So I support the sister. I think she is one of the best players. She definitely is like the heir to Serena Williams in tennis. And I just want her to be right, man. Because I want to see her fulfill her potential as not just an athlete, but as a person. Like last year, she won the US Open again, and she's wearing like the face mask, the mask over her face for all the people that were killed by police. Like,
Right.
in a sport like tennis, and you know how tennis is, and the type of people that play tennis, the country clubs and all that stuff, like her doing something like that is like so bold and powerful, that that's somebody that I look at and I always root for. So I just want the best for her. And if anybody else is going through it as well, like please, like don't like feel you need to like continue pushing on and front like everything's fine when it's not. Like it's gonna eventually like crack, and we don't want the pressure of you like kind of collapsing on you falling apart. It's very important you take care of yourself. Like seriously, not like in the lip service. I mean seriously, take care of yourself.
Right. And we have such a long way to go when it comes to mental health.
Hmm.
With physical chronic conditions, you have cardiologists.
Hmm.
Too often with mental health, we just lump it as mental health. Well, depression is very different from bipolar disorder.
Right.
And this has been a big problem because, like I said, I used to do care coordination in the healthcare industry.
Hmm.
Um, a big problem was that I was talking to a doctor. People will get assigned medication for depression and they had bipolar disorder.
Mm.
And, it's two different conditions. It's mental health, but two different conditions. That's been a big problem. People being misclassified, getting wrong medications, and a lot of times that can make things worse.
Hmm.
Um, we need like specific specialists. Just from my experience of dealing with people that was dealing with a vast range of mental health, from depression, anxiety, to schizophrenia, to bipolar disorder. These are all different conditions, and just to lump it all as mental health, that's just like labeling all physical conditions as one condition. It's very different, and they need specialists. We need more individualized specialists. I know we have some, but it's not really talked about that way, and a lot more work needs to be done with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, just like you have a cardiologist office, we need just a schizophrenia office,
Yeah.
or just a bipolar office, because I mean, again, the how people react to these different conditions is vastly different.
Right.
So it's just not talked about enough. It's not. It isn't. We really not serious about it. Some insurances still don't even cover mental health.
Yeah, that's a trippy thing too. When you realize that like a lot of insurances don't cover that stuff at all. Don't cover therapy. Um, yeah, I think that's because we don't understand the brain that well at all. Like we don't really understand most of the functions of it. it leads to people not taking it seriously. Whereas like the heart, you mentioned uh cardiologist. There's like in my head right now, I can think of like 10 different heart diseases that people can have, um,
There you go.
and or cardiovascular diseases, and there probably is much more for what's going on with our brains as well, or psychology diseases that we're not aware of, we're not thinking about because there isn't really an emphasis on it. If there's any emphasis on psychology and stuff, it's more for like criminalizing people or militarizing people and stuff, not on like actually taking care of people. Yeah, man, like there needs to be so much more work done in this field, you know. And to bring it into politics a little bit, like we used to, I mean, I know they weren't the best places. We used to have like state-sponsored mental health facilities around the country,
Mm,
that were all removed during the early '80s under Ronald Reagan. Like we removed like funding for all these different facilities where they were shut down. So that's something that kind of considers well. I'm not saying those are the best places because, you know, some of them weren't kept upright, but at least there was some state funding for it, and state taking care of it for these people. And now there isn't really anything. It's like the private facilities, which probably are worse because because it's made for a profit wheel instead of for an actual care wheel. And so yeah, man, like excuse me, there's like so much work that needs to be done on that.
yeah.
I you know, whatever healthcare thing comes to pass in the future, and I do believe we'll have universal healthcare. I'm not sure when, but I think we're it's so much like momentum forward that it's going to happen eventually. That has to be like a key component, and we have to put more money into like creating people that are doctors for the mind, and really studying that because they're just. I think the thing you pointed out is that there just isn't that much money put into the field to study these things outside of like criminalizing and stuff. It's not like money to actually study people's brains and figure out what is a healthy, how to make a healthy help person be healthy and so forth. Like even these pills that people talk about, and you talked about before, medicine. Um, a lot of them work. I'm not saying they don't, but some of them like people like I don't feel right about, and that means that there needs to be look more work into why that person doesn't feel right. Let's like start studying that more and figuring out what can make this person feel right. What's the right combination? You know, that's not a me. And I mean, be careful. I'm not saying I'm anti medication for mental illness. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we need to actually have real studies to make sure these things are right for people because the pills are for the right persons and make sure that we're figuring out what the right combinations are. Because I feel like you mentioned earlier, there's like a one size fits all thing, and that's just not the answer.
Right. And this is the thing too. A lot of people that's suffering from mental health don't want to
Mm-hmm.
admit it because you can't get certain positions
Yep.
if they find out. Like for example, if you in the military, a lot of people in the military suffering from mental health that's at duty that's scared to get help because of security clearances.
Yep.
And that impacts promotions, therefore impact your career, which impact money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that's something else that have to be looked into, and also um, go politics at the root of all of it. Politics is at the root of everything because it's that policy. We go back and we was talking about workers earlier. Under Obama administration, they did make some rules for overtime that was more friendly towards workers.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Trump got in office. What he do? Reverse that right away.
Right.
That went out the window. It's
Mm-hmm.
just little stuff like that, and that's a lot of times my criticism of mainstream media. They don't really focus and cover that aspect of policy. Is always the hot button issues they don't discuss, what's really important. On top of that, the war on drugs. Right, we could talk
Word.
about
Oh.
the big pharma giving all this money to the politicians. Um, really doing misleading advertisements. Um, they knew how addictive some of these opioids were. They completely ignored it. In the meantime, you still have marijuana listed as Schedule One, which had
Mm-hmm.
medical benefits. It's getting better now. I think the majority of states at least have medical marijuana legal. but not in
Mm-hmm.
all states.
Mm-hmm.
Still legal in some states. And we starting to, I guess, learn some of the benefits of psychedelic mushrooms,
Mm-hmm. Can I say that? Yeah.
which is positive. I know they're doing a lot of. Colorado seem to be on the forefront on this
Yeah.
particular issue. The Colorado, Washington was the first states to legalize marijuana
Mm-hmm.
statewide, and right around, I don't want to say the whole state of Colorado because that's a little bit too broad, but especially the Denver area is experimenting with mushrooms.
Yep.
And let me be more clear because experimenting with mushrooms sounds crazy, right?
I know what
But
you meant, but yeah, I definitely know what you meant.
that sounds crazy. But you know what I mean is they've been using it with patients that's in hospice,
Right.
and it seem to be easing their pain, and they starting to get more into depression with it, and it seems to help. We don't have full data on it yet, but the initial signs been very positive,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm hoping that I'm about to get mad again because it gets me right back to we picked Biden, not me and you, but this country picked Biden,
Yeah.
and got such an old school mentality. We really need somebody that will move some of these drugs off of Schedule One and actually fund studies because we can't even really get federal studies with marijuana
Yeah.
because it's listed as a Schedule One.
Yep.
It's so we don't even know the full benefits of what it can do, or if it's harmful in other ways. We can't really get full data because of this backwards war on drugs mentality with reefer madness and stuff,
Yeah.
where it really was to demonize certain groups of the country
Yep.
and facilitate the war on drugs. He really if you read it, Nixon really wanted it really started with Nixon. He really wanted to get black people and hippies.
Yep.
He really wanted to lock up black people and
Yep.
hippies. So that's what it was. You know,
Yeah.
it is crazy. It's just crazy. We missing out on so much medical research. People's living a more painful life, and maybe in some cases, it costs some people lives because of this
Mm-hmm.
mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Yeah, that you mentioned psychedelics earlier. We were using psychedelics as a Chinese as a weapon for soldiers or whatever, and instead
Mhm.
of like and discovering stuff with it, and then we just stopped using it for that because we realized it wasn't good for for the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean that's what they was trying to do the crazy stuff like MK Ultra and
Well, yeah,
stuff like that
yeah,
with the LSD and stuff,
yeah, that's
which
extra stuff.
oh man, that's a whole different thing. My God,
If you get a chance
some of
to,
this country did.
if you get a chance to, I listened to this podcast called Behind the Bastards, and they did a
uh,
series on the Foster brothers, Alan Foster and I forgot his brother's name, and basically they were like Alan was the one that had the CIA and did the MK Ultra stuff,
mhm.
and his brother was the State Department head, um, and yeah, the Dulles brother. I'm sorry, Foster Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles. I'm sorry, that's what their names were. Yeah, if you read up about them and all the crazy stuff they were into, they were the ones that started did the MK Ultra stuff with the CIA. But they pretty much like in the nicest way possible. The reason why the world's messed up is because of them, especially with like the European borders and like the Middle Eastern borders after World War I. They were the reasons why we had some of that stuff that's still to this day affecting so many things. But yeah, man, like I you know I definitely like I don't I know I definitely believe that like there's benefits to some of these drugs that we just decide to shut our brains off for and not try to do stuff with, and we need to like really just do our due diligence and learn like everything that they can and can't do and how
Right.
they can help society and try to bring more of that to the fore.
The
It doesn't make sense to especially when you have like real harmful drugs that are legal, like alcohol. Like alcohol is very very harmful, or tobacco is very very harmful, and that's just like you can buy that at a CVS for
right,
whatever. So just we got to consider that stuff
right,
um and try and there's no like there's not much medicinal benefits for some of those stuff, but yet we've seen stuff of like marijuana, and we've seen like people will tell you there are a lot of positive things with psychedelics, and we just say forget it. No, we can't have it. It's hippies and black people and jazz singers and stuff instead of like real positive benefits of these things.
Right. And the funny thing is, I'm advocating for it. I have no desire to take. I have no.
You ain't trying to do
I
some
don't even.
mushrooms, dog. Come on now.
I have
No
no desire to do so. You know why? Because we keep it real here. I had an edible before, and that didn't go well.
That's right. Let me tell you this here.
That didn't go well. So I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of hesitant with that, but even if it's not for me, it shouldn't be illegal.
Right.
And that's the
Exactly.
thing,
Exactly.
man. Like, you can have your personal opinion on anything. I don't really care that your personal beliefs shouldn't dictate policy. That's the thing. Like, I have a lot of stuff that I think is stupid. I have a lot of personal beliefs that I have for my own personal life that shouldn't dictate
Right.
your life.
Right.
That's what it comes down to for to
Listen,
me.
Paul God, I'm gonna tell you this: what you're saying right now, everything you're saying right now. If this was the mentality of Americans, then we'd be in a much better place right now as a country.
Right.
On so
But
many things.
it's too bad, man. It really too bad. And
Oh God.
I feel like the older generation too was hit so hard. And here's a problem because they still outvote younger people by a
by a lot.
wide margin.
Yeah.
So this is why people that's 50 and under, because the young people, like, below 30 is a lot more progressive, but even people 40, like 49 and younger, you look at the numbers, much more progressive, right? But we don't vote like the older generation do, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, I mean, as you've been seeing with the last few weeks in American politics, you can kind of understand why in some instances. But we also have to like battle that and say like, nah, this is important because if you want to get rid of people that are doing the terrible things, you gotta vote and you gotta be a part of the process and not just like I mentioned before, not just voting, but really being active, really paying attention, really like studying your candidates, really going to town hall meetings, really like being there and being active. And I know it's a lot of commitment, but at the end of the day, it's like this everything that these people are doing is impacting your life. Just because like someone kissed your baby and is throwing out beads at a parade doesn't mean they have your best interest at heart. So you got to like really learn these people and be who they are and learn about them and understand if this person is the right person for you to support. Whether that's president or if that's your local ANC or alderman or ward or council or whatever, you got to like really study people and know who they are and know what they believe in and see if there's like if y'all believe in the same things because we too much in this country rely on the code of personality of all our candidates, and that's every level. I do like this person. Is this person good? I mean, is this person cool? Well, can I have a beer with this person? Can I like smoke weed with this person? The answer to that is no. You shouldn't care about any of that stuff. You need to be caring about is this person going to do the damn job and support you and help you as a person that's living in this country. That's what you need to be worried about. I don't care if I can't have some Hennessy with like my city councilman. I care if they're going to be effective at the job and they're going to do things that this community needs. That's what's important.
Yeah, you said it right there, but I don't think people look at how politics control your entire life, whether you be able to get to work at a timely fashion. All that's policy, all that is politics. But for some reason, people don't view it like that. And a lot of it have to do with the education system. So speaking of education system, I want to get into critical race theory real quick because that leads into voting rights, right? So you want to add anything to this mental health discussion before we move on?
I think we covered it a lot, man. We talked a lot about it. It's very critical.
So I'm not going to get too deep into that, but my man Lamont Hill, they have the Black News channel now.
Okay.
he's on that, and he been doing some interviews about critical race theories, people that critical of it, because they a lot of states and conservatives have a
Mm-hmm.
big push to make sure this is not taught in high schools or schools, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um it is funny because their criticism is that critical race theory states that that this country is inherently racist, and they don't think it's true, while simultaneously pushing for laws to stop people that look like me and you from being able to vote.
Right.
So I just find that ironic, right there. That's like, okay, so on their end, they want to just teach America is perfect, and even when we made mistakes, we corrected it quickly, always had good intention,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to keep that myth going. And I think that myth is no longer shared by a wide margin of people, more than there ever. So I think that's funny. And it's also funny, these very same people is still advocating to for you got people calling for Qs,
Right.
like you got people saying that Trump going to be back in office by August,
Right.
all sorts of stuff. The hypocrisy is amazing with me. I know I just threw a lot out there, but um the first, what I want you to respond to, how do they justify in their mind trying to criticize critical race theory, and this country is not racist, or I simultaneously try to take voting rights away from mainly people that look like us.
Oh, they don't justify it. They're racist. That's just the gist of it. You can't justify racism, and they don't even they know what they're doing. You know what I mean? Like they know what they're doing. But what I and the other thing when I say that they know what they're doing because they know it's racist to strip voting rights, to continue pumping money to the police instead of finding alternative ways to make sure people are apprehended, or making sure that people aren't in a position to become arrested by the police. They're not interested in that stuff at all. What they're interested in is like making sure black and brown people are incarcerated. That's like the gist of it, or killed, or catch like some sickness from the healthcare system and aren't be able to get treated for it and so forth. So just kind of like you can't justify racism. The other thing that's interesting about this whole debate, though, and what's funny about it, and it might be effective because America's a racist country, is that they're going to make this a issue next year in elections. You're gonna see this in so many like states. They want to teach your kids the alternate history of this country, and we can't have that. That's going to be a huge campaign issue next year. Like you can already kind of see it, like kind of like tracking to that, 'cause they don't have anything else to run on, except
Right.
for running on daddy racism. And so there's no just they can't justify it. They know they can't justify it, but what they're going to do is use that as a pitch to win over soccer moms and soccer dads that are concerned about the way society's moving, and but also aren't like that interested in reading too deeply on what's actually going on and stuff. So yeah, it's troubling, especially considering that critical race theory isn't necessarily like what's being taught in schools. Like that's not what anybody's actually asking for. Like critical race theory is something that you learn like in college or in the high level courses. It's not like I mean, you can maybe like have your curriculum, you know, have like touches of it, and really, it's to me the way I've been reading is more so like learning about history from you know the more truthful perspective instead of what the perspective is of what we've been taught, which is like the Pilgrims are the heroes and the Westerners are the heroes, and that took over the rest and tamed those savages that were
Right.
there and all
Right.
this stuff. Like there's a all they're saying is let's teach things differently. Let's like start like really incorporating some of like of how this history of this nation is like really impacting people that aren't white. It's critical race theory, but it's not like the actual deep theory of it that you'll learn like in college. It's just like this the reaction to that 1619 project where you learn about like the impact of like first of all you learn like the treatment of slaves when they came here and all that stuff in 1619 and just like the ramifications of that. I know the one of the authors of it, she isn't able to get tenure at the University of North Carolina now because of her being an author on this
Right. Hmm.
I'm forgetting the sister's name right now, but she was a professor at the University of North Carolina.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's not able to get tenure now because of her being a part of this project, because the Republican legislator down there is like, no, we can't have her being a tenure professor and stuff. This is a serious like fight, and it's something that I think. But the thing that's making me optimistic about it is that I think a lot more young people are like younger people, and you mentioned people that are 49 and younger. A lot more people that are of younger are kind of like calling bullshit on a lot of this stuff, and
Mhm.
saying like, all right, this like yeah, like you can't sit here and tell me that we shouldn't learn about the history of race in this country, but then also like say I'm deeply troubled by what happened to George Floyd last year. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or police violence around the country against black people. This is incongruent. It doesn't make sense. And I think
Right.
a lot of people are realizing that now.
And the funny thing is the 1619 project perfect? No, I do think there's a few inaccuracies,
Hmm.
but compared to the history books that our children read, oh, it's much more accurate than that.
And let me talk to you there too. Let me just say one thing real quick.
Yep.
It may not be accurate, but here's the thing: history isn't accurate. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Right.
history's always up for debate. It's not fixed, and we have
Hmm.
to start thinking of history as like this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened.
Right.
You can always find something that dispels something. That's okay.
Right.
So if you find 1690 project that falls in that, that's okay. It's not a big deal. But like you're saying,
Hmm.
it's that versus like our heroes
Right.
that tamed the West
And,
and made the land habitable for us.
yep. And let me be clear. I'm not saying it's inaccurate as a whole because I think
Mhm.
it was a great piece of work
Yeah,
overall. But in the body, was there a few mistakes here and there? Sure.
for sure.
But
Yeah.
like if you go to I believe it was a book by I believe historian James Logan, Lies My Teacher Told Me.
Yes, I actually have that book
Yep.
myself right here. Yeah,
Great book.
yeah.
Great book. He goes through and dissect all the inaccuracies in the main textbooks that children was reading in the 90s.
Hmm.
So yes, it's much more accurate than that. And a lot of mistakes were small mistakes in there. But so we're not saying that it's perfect, but it was still a great piece of work, and it definitely was a lot more accurate than inaccurate. Overall, it was a great piece of work.
And let's be like clear too. The what they're challenging isn't necessarily like those inaccuracies. They're challenging the narratives,
Right.
because there's a narrative, like we said earlier, of America being heroic, and like you're saying, we always have good intentions and we're always right, even when we're wrong, and all this stuff. That's not. They're upset about the narrative that's in the 1619 project, another alternative, but more like well researched and
Yeah.
and found books and all that stuff, and other articles of research.
Yeah. What they can't get past is that America is supposed to stand for freedom, but how could you stand for freedom when you had a group of people that was living under authoritative rule
Hmm.
um, until at least the mid 60s, and you can
Right,
argue still to this day,
right.
but at least to the mid 60s if you want to be kind.
Yeah, if you want to say it wasn't legalized, yes, yeah, it's just the mentality still there, but legal like be- we haven't had a democracy. I don't, I can't. I wish I could remember who said this. It was like a Asian, right? I just can't. I wish I could remember the person who said it, but it always stuck with me. America wasn't a democracy until like the Voting Rights Act in '66.
It still wasn't a democracy.
You know what I mean? But yeah, if it wasn't. It couldn't really say it until that point though,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that was like a law that
exactly.
was passed. You know what I mean? And when
That
you see that, it's like wow, that's kind of like trippy, but it's the truth. Like we weren't a democracy at least until that point. It still isn't now in a lot of ways, and they're trying to revert back to it to the olden times. But it did. It took that long for this country to become, at least on paper, a democracy.
Yep. And if you go back, like you research stuff like Baker's Rebellion,
Hmm.
instance like that, where even poor white people was basically smothered, but then they said, okay, look at those Negroes, you above them. Like go back to like Baker's Rebellion. Go take a real look at the history of this country. It is undeniable if you want
Hmm.
to look at it objectively.
I
And
mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I mean,
Yeah,
we're celebrating what 100 years now, the Tulsa massacre. Think
and
about
they
when
this
you were
country just now
younger.
acknowledging that.
Right, just now notching it. And think about
Yeah,
when you were younger. I remember when I was in school and I read about that, and back in grade school and stuff. It wasn't called a massacre. It was called like a riot, like
the
Tulsa
Tulsa
riots.
race riots. Yeah,
Yeah, and it was in line with all the other race riots that happened during that era. Like there was hundreds of them around the country. It was mentioned in terms of that realm, not in terms of like a group of people being slaughtered and losing like their homes, livelihoods because of BS. It was deemed like another just like racial skirmish. That's what it
mm.
was. That's what it was called. And I remember that as a kid, like when all this stuff was happening. I remember thinking about that as a younger person. Like, damn, that's how they was taught to me. So if you're contextualizing that, how can you sit here and say like, yeah, everything else is perfect though? I mean, we got that wrong, but everything else is perfect, and that was only 100 years ago. But it wasn't, whatever, blah blah blah. But like, nah. You got to like, these things are like we've been taught a history that isn't anywhere near accurate. Not because of like the inaccuracies of like the reporting, but just the narratives of it. Like the narratives are all wrong.
Listen, it was a fight to make Martin Luther King Day a federal holiday just in the 80s.
Right,
I
right,
mean, that's within our lifetimes, you
right.
know. So
And it wasn't
uh,
legal. It wasn't. It was still not a holiday in Arizona. You know what I mean? For many
right.
years.
So the reason why I wanted to talk about voting rights, before we get out here, I just want to touch on this, right? So
Hmm.
before I went to work the last couple of days, I was watching CNN, and good God, CNN is awful. But before I still watch it just to see what's going on in mainstream media, what the stories they covering.
Hmm.
And this goes for the New York Times too, because they've been covering it in the New York Times right now too.
Hmm.
But they was talking about all these voting um, suppression laws that these states are trying to act and pass. So the new one is Texas,
Hmm.
but Georgia is probably the most famous case, and a whole bunch of other states. I mean, they introduced bills in Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And what crazy is, I don't even think they will be covering if Biden didn't make that Memorial Day speech,
Mm.
which this should be covered every day because they really trying to take away a right for a lot of people. Now, some people will say, well, the law don't say if you black, you can't vote. Of course, it's not going to say that. If you go back to the history, you go back to somebody like Lee Atwater, he especially told everybody he didn't want certain groups of people voting.
Hmm.
Southern strategy. I mean, you could go so on and on about the history of voting suppression, but to present day. So what are most of these bills talking about doing? Well, they targeting Democratic areas, and what are they doing? They shutting down polling stations. When you shut down a polling station, what do that do? That means people have to go further out. That means lines going to be longer. Along with shutting down polling stations, you would think they'll make the hours longer, right? No,
No.
they cutting hours on top of that. So imagine those lines. Um, Election day is not a federal holiday,
Hmm.
so a lot of people have to work. With these long lines, you're not going to be able to go to lunch and
Hmm.
vote during your lunch hour, assuming you even live anywhere close to your precinct, because you might
Hmm.
work further out.
Hmm.
So tell me what what's that about? Then they try to get rid of write-in votes or voting by mail. Excuse me. They're trying to get rid of mail voting.
Hmm.
They trying to cut early voting out or restrict the days of early voting.
Hmm.
And so they doing a bunch of different stuff to make it harder to vote. And what I found amusing on CNN, they acting like this is a new problem. I mean, this country history is a voter suppression. I mean, when this country was started, it was only white men that owned property that could vote. Then I think it was around the time of the Andrew Jackson election, I believe was the first election where um, all white men could vote. and good God, Andrew. Too
That's
bad they vote for Andrew Jackson, who that's a whole different case.
yeah, that's
But
a
anyway,
different
move
conversation.
back on target. Then you had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that made ended slavery. 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment made African American citizens.
Hmm.
The 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote, and for a little while we did have some positions, but a lot of them was appointed positions too. But that didn't last too long.
Right.
That didn't last too long. Women still couldn't vote.
Hmm.
But with black men, even though technically we had the right to vote, the they came up with poll taxes, the grandfather clause. If your grandfather couldn't vote, you can't vote. And if you're coming out of slavery, how many black people grandfathers could vote?
Exactly.
You had literacy tests, and
Yes.
a
Yep.
literacy test wasn't whether you could read. It would be stuff like, can you recite the whole Constitution?
Right.
Especially in southern states. If you did vote, you risked getting lynched.
Hmm.
And this was going on 50s, 60s. Look at Medgar Evers was assassinated for registering black people to vote.
Yep.
Um, so so like this goes on and on. And I didn't even mention like women's suffrage, where women finally got the right to vote in the 20th century. that
Right.
was that was in the 20th century.
Yep.
I mean, women couldn't even own credit cards without their husband's permission. I think to what was it, the mid 70s,
I
late
think that's
70s?
correct. Yeah, I think that's the correct.
But that's not what voting. But just give you an example. Um, Lee Atwater with the Southern Strategy talking about how he wanted to press certain turnout, how he didn't want large elections. Um, the less people vote, the better it is for them. Look up Lee Atwater. You don't know what I'm talking about. In the early
Much
2000s,
better version of Roger Stone, not Roger Stone, of Karl Rove, like a way superior version of Karl Rove.
right.
Way superior.
And it's funny how Republicans and conservatives don't even want to talk about this when the RNC apologized for this in the early 2000s. They admitted to doing so and
Yep.
apologized.
Yep.
So
Yep.
don't take my word for it. Take the RNC word for it.
Hmm.
This actually happened. And then it started with, the voting ID laws that they was
Hmm.
passing. They was pushing that like in Pennsylvania, southern
Wisconsin.
states. And then when you don't check it at the time, it grows out of control.
Exactly.
You have people trying to defend those voting ID laws, and we knew what that was for.
Yep.
Not to mention, we have the prison industrial complex, which a good portion of people that went to prison can't vote after they served their time. Um, so we was just talking about how bad the war on drugs was too. So, I mean, throughout history, we have voter suppression. So, like, this is nothing new. And I think some of my problem with the mainstream media, they don't get in depth with the discussions. They nibble around the edges of
Hmm.
it. And see, the cat got cited with talking about,
All right. The
yeah,
Catholics voter suppression
right,
is stopping
right.
that.
And they carry water for Biden like no other. They was trying to say, oh, Biden can't really do nothing. He can't stop the states. Yes, unilaterally, he can't do nothing, but he can definitely push Manchin and Cinema more than he's been doing. He could have been talking about the For the People Act or HR 1 or
Yeah.
John Lewis Voting Rights Act, whatever you want to call it. He could have been talking about that, and he's just now starting to,
Hmm.
which, you awful late in the game.
Yeah.
I know I had to go on that little tangent, but so
No, man, it was necessary. I think what it's funny that they're bringing this up now, but like um, last year during the election, um, uh, there's two things I want to bring up. So like in Atlanta, like in Georgia, for instance, especially in the Atlanta area, you had lines of like 12 hours. This is during the primaries. Like you had lines of like 12 hours, because of like some of it because of COVID restrictions, but some of it because of what you're discussing. Like a lot of precincts lost their like the locations. A lot of polling locations were closed. So you had that. You had like long lines during the primaries and during the general elections across the country, especially in southern states like Georgia, Texas, Florida. A lot of states were having those issues. So when you like think about that, yeah, this isn't a new problem, and I bring up last year, but I recall this happened in 2016 as well. In southern states where there were like 12-hour lines for people to vote. People would
Hmm.
stay there to vote, but not everybody's going to do that, and
And,
you shouldn't require that to them. The
and
other
then you
thing
can't
too,
bring them water now either.
you can't bring the water now too. And the
Hmm.
other thing you didn't mention when you were going through it, another law these states are restricting are like the group pollings, which are like the social polls stuff that they do for black churches in the
Yeah,
South.
yeah, yep.
They're restricting
Hmm.
that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're making that a felony in some instances, which is insane.
They're either making
Um,
it a felony, or in some cases they're just saying you can't early vote on Sundays.
right, right,
Vote.
right.
Yep.
So you have that as well. And then I remember this is funny, but like I don't know if you watch SNL Saturday Night Live. They had one of their like skits about that very thing where they were trying to vote in like Texas, and they went to like 4 different locations, and they were told they can't vote. And they were like they dressed up, put on the best outfits. They were like excited to go, and they had like a little song going, and they would show up, and they're like, "No, you can't vote here. You can't vote here." And then they would end up going to like some long line for like 15 hours to try to vote, and they couldn't vote at the end because they
Oh,
didn't
when
bring
you
the
got there.
masks. But
Right.
but like that highlights the point of what's going on. Like you mentioned, like you brought out like so clearly, man. Like the fight to vote in this country is just it's been a battle since its inception. If you're not rich and white, it's hard for you to vote. And what I'm noticing, and I think you're noticing too, is that they want to go back to the times of like property owners only being able to vote only, right? Rich property owners and white property owners only being able to vote only. And if they
Yep.
could have it their way, it'd be white men voting only. That's what they want. Mitch McConnell put the bag out I think it was last year, where he said, voting is a privilege, not a right. He mentioned that, and that was barely touched by anybody from what I remember. But like he said that, like that's what the thinking is that it's a privilege, not a right. And instead of trying to really be a democracy and expanding voting for everybody. Like I'm crazy. Like I think that you should have like prisons should have voting precincts. They should be able to vote in prison. That's how crazy I am. Like I don't see why they why you shouldn't have candidates going down there to try to get the votes of prisoners. Like that's just the way I think about stuff. You can't have a full democracy if you're restricting this, but that's just the story of America. America's never really been a full democracy. It's always try to make it as hard as possible to vote. And these new things these new laws that are passing now across the states are just like a continuation of like that whole process of, yeah, we don't want you to vote unless you're like rich and white. That's it. If you're not rich and white, you can't vote.
Right. And just to check some of the stuff that people say, there's like, you shouldn't have a problem getting ID. First of all, when you vote, you just don't show up just to vote. They check your signature.
Mm-hmm.
So they match it, make sure your signature match. It really was for, because a lot of people in urban areas, some of them didn't have driver's license ID because you take public transportation.
Yep.
Depending if you lived in a metropolitan that have good public transportation, some people didn't have that state ID. So it is what it is. But that was kind of like the least of the voter suppressing that was going on. And this was all predictable once the Supreme Court got rid of the parts of the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of it's just not surprising when it comes to that
And
aspect.
it's a funny thing too is they also we mentioned earlier about people that are younger not being able to vote. They make it very hard for college students to vote in
They
these
do.
areas. They make it extremely hard
They do.
because they don't want them to vote because they know that's more of a they believe it's more of a left leaning people. I kind of not sure about that all the time, but the fact is they don't want people in colleges to vote either, and that's a sizable portion of a community, and they make it very very hard for students that go to especially big state schools. They make it very very hard for them to vote. And so when you consider all of that, man, like it's just always been a battle. It's always a war to
Well,
try to vote.
well, that's one of the things I left off my little history breakdown. I mean, if you was 18, you couldn't vote until after the Vietnam War.
It's
So
71,
you had to
71.
Yep. So you had situations where you had 18, 19, 20-year-olds getting drafted and they had no say in what direction the
Mm-hmm.
war goes in.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another breakdown there too. And before we get out here, I just want to leave people with this last little word. I know people is fed up with politics on the federal level, especially presidential politics, but the reason why these voter suppression laws is very important, not just the Supreme Court, not just with executive orders like the overtime rules that Trump overthrew for the Obama administration. There's so much stuff, by the way, there's so much stuff that Trump did that people just don't know. And even people that you would think would know better just don't know. Like, wow, he did that. They just think that he was just a clown, but policy wise, nothing. But that's a whole different story. You know, but besides the federal level, this is very important in local and state politics, right? So if you have a DA race, which we talk about how important DAs and sheriff races are, this could literally be a life and death issue for people. If you have a DA, if you have a cop that does the wrong thing, deals excessive force, who the DA is determine whether charges going to be brought on that police officer or not. The sheriff race determines what condition your county jail is going to be and how the county jail is going to be run. The DA basically control, okay, what's the bail laws going to be in that area? If your state don't have something like marijuana legalized, how tough that particular county or going to be on if you get found with marijuana. So in local races, in a close race, this can make all the difference in the world.
Right.
Whether the polling place is open till 9-10 o'clock or whether it's open till 6 o'clock. That makes all the difference in the world. Whether somebody can walk to their polling station or because their polling station was closed, they have to go a further distance, especially depending on their age, depending on their health. I mean, people don't think about it in those terms. People don't think about it in terms of who your Secretary of State is, who control your state elections,
right,
or who your state senator or your state assemblyman, or if you have state house, your state house rep, determine it, whether they going to do something like bail reform on the state level, or are they going to stick with tough on crime legislation, whether they going to try to free up money for grants for local small businesses, or whether they're going to give another tax cut. You know, so these are very important issues that really impact us day to day. It impacts health, whether they going to choose to cut Medicaid on a state level, where they plan to expand Medicaid. And healthcare, especially for poor individuals, is literally life or death.
Right.
So I want people to think about it in those terms as well, and not just get caught up, because if you watch the news, it's so much just presidential level. I mean, these voter suppression laws going to have a major impact in these type of races as well.
Yep. It's all connected, and you brought it out, man. Like, you got to start thinking more critically about what's going on around, like what's going on in this ground level where you are, and not just like looking at what's going down in 1600 Pennsylvania or Capitol Hill. So, so yeah, man, like these things are all like critical and they all matter. And, you know, I just hope that people are just starting to see that, like, man, this, excuse me, they're trying to do something that they're really trying to bring us back to the 1770s and 80s, or whatever the Constitution was founded, like the 1700s and 1800s and stuff, with a lot of our regressive like voting laws. And, you know, as a society, we should always be trying to like do better and progress, and they're going backwards. Just think of it like that, and think about how these backward steps, like how, because you weren't able to get to the polling station at 7 and they close at 6:30 or 6 o'clock, how that's now going to lead, that could potentially like hem you up eventually, like you get arrested and have to face charge over having like a half a gram of marijuana or something, or a broken up like a joint, and how that's going to now put you into like some terrible prison jail, and you're going to get denied bail, and then you're going to have to get a public defender. That's also a part of like these policy stuff as well,
Mm-hmm.
and end up serving a criminal a couple of years in prison for having like I have a joint. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like stuff like that. This is all like serious stuff, and it's not taught to us to think like that, and to see how these things all impact. And yeah, man, like they're trying really hard to go back to the times where me and you couldn't vote, and I hope people are waking up to that and realizing like, yeah, we have to like push back against that. But I'm gonna be positive. Let's go for that. I'm gonna be positive here. I hope that people are
Well,
waking up and seeing that.
we'll see. I'll leave it off at a positive note. I think they might do something about the For the People Act. It probably won't end up being the For the People Act. It's going to be a watered down version, but I think because it depends on the Democrat survival. Because if these laws go through, Democratic Party is basically done for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So because of self-interest, the Senate might, not guarantee, they might do something on it, some watered down version. All that campaign finance stuff is going to be out though. None that's going to make it, but maybe they'll do something. We'll see.
What can help them? Make DC a state. That'd be definitely like something that could help them. But hey,
Right.
what do I know? I don't know anything. I'm just me.
It should be. You have people again, a area that have more population in the state of Wyoming that's not represented in Congress at all.
Mm-hmm.
Besides ceremonial vote status.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you want to lead the people with anything before you get out of here?
No, man, it's been a good episode, good discussion. All right, and I think that the discussion about mental health is going to help a lot of people.
Yep.
So like we said earlier, just seriously take care of yourself. Like even if your boss is like whatever to it, take care of yourself, because at the end of the day, you only have you to protect. And if you're not feeling right, take care of yourself, please.
Exactly. All right. Once again, subscribe, share.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the pod guy, we got Heem in here. Peace.
Peace.